Julius puts up a three. And a goal!
It's Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer of Cincinnati Rivals site, frontofficenews.com. Russ Heltman, yours truly, of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI, coming off of signing day for football and an unfortunate loss for the Cincinnati Bearcats basketball team on Tuesday, heading into their matchup against Howard on Sunday. We'll get to the full show in just a moment. First, tell you about Bet Online, which continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL, to UFC. Head to Bet Online today, and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. Neil, start with some thoughts on the recruiting class here very shortly, signing day recap, maybe a sign for optimism from the 2024 season, picking up the pieces there on football, and then basketball recapping a 68-60 loss to Villanova on Tuesday, and looking ahead to Howard. Will Cincinnati get Dan Skillings back before the crosstown shootout? The biggest kind of question surrounding the program right now. All that coming up on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, open the floor to you, my man. Cincinnati Bearcats recruiting class finalized for the 2025 cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 2025 recruiting class is officially signed and locked and ready to go for Cincinnati. Obviously, National Signing Day took place yesterday. A couple big things to kind of note about with this recruiting class, like you mentioned, Russ, was the one thing that Cincinnati could not really afford to have happen in this recruiting class happened, unfortunately, and that was seeing four-star safety Jamari DeLoach flip from Cincinnati to Virginia Tech, which obviously was the headliner of this recruiting class. But with the departure of him, Tim Griffin steps in as the only four-star, high three-star, four-star in this class. So losing a guy like Jamari DeLoach was a big loss for Cincinnati. But then you look down, you get three late flips in the final 24 hours heading into National Signing Day with Marcus McGregor from Wyoming. They flipped him. Miles Harrison, they flipped from Buffalo. And Jamari Johnson, defensive back out of Troy, who was committed to Troy. They get him to flip. But overall, the big thing with this class too, Russ, is that Scott Satterfield mentioned the biggest thing that they are looking forward to this class was the size and the length up front within the trenches on both sides of the ball, in the offense and the defensive side of the ball. You look down, starting on the defensive side of the ball, you have Tim Griffiths, who's 6'5", 255, was a four-star recruit, held an Alabama offer, had plenty of big Power 5 SEC offers as well, but chose the Bearcats there. Cincinnati got involved late in his recruiting process, but they were able to seal the deal there. Cameron Neal, 6'3", 240 pounds. James Early, they were involved late with there in his process as well, but 6'6", 230 pounds there at the end position. And then you have Cordell McPhee, who is 6'5", 295 pounds. And Russ, I mean, Cordell McPhee, like you look down and you see 6'5", 295 pounds as an 18-year-old. That is a huge sign on the defensive trenches there, especially at that nose tackle position where he has played throughout his high school season. Give him a full, now not 100% sure if he's going to be one of those guys early enrolling here in January, but give him a full 6-7 months with Coach Nico, put on about 15, 20 pounds maybe there up front in the trenches, re-chisel his body. Could be a guy that comes in and makes an immediate impact. Obviously, that's one of the positions of need for Cincinnati, but this recruiting class, Russ, as you mentioned, the biggest things to talk about with them is there at the offensive and defensive line caliber. Jeremiah Kelly playing for a state championship tonight, actually, versus Anderson up in Cleveland. 6'3", 295-pound offensive lineman. He's kind of the guy that spearheads your offensive line alongside Zach Taylor out of Georgia, who's 6'3", 305. So those two guys kind of headline the offensive side of the ball. But Russ, as you mentioned, there's a lot of things to take away from this. Zeb Kinsley is your only quarterback in the class. Zion Johnson is your only running back in the class. So Cincinnati feels confident at who they have at running back and who they have at quarterback. But on top of it, a lot to take away from this class. But it's mostly offensive linemen, defensive linemen heavy. Scott Satterfield alluded to what they're going to go after in the transfer portal, being the wide receiver position, offensive line, defensive line. It's going to be interesting to see how they really attack the portal here when the portal opens up next Monday. It's going to be interesting to see how they attack over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, it kind of just feels like it is what it is with the recruiting and just overall where this program's at. You can't make money appear out of thin air, Neil. You can't make money appear out of thin air. They're hamstrung by the NIL funds they have access to right now. And the bottom line is, Neil, you're not throwing six figures at a mid-tier 4-star player when you could throw those six figures at a guy in the transfer portal who's already had production at the college level. Am I right? I mean, that's just kind of feels like
you're 100%
like
right
where they're at. And for fans to get upset, people to get upset about the recruiting in general, put that energy into NIL. That's all I got to say, because you can't make the numbers
disappear.
Right. It's just
on top of it too.
It is what it is.
This staff has always been very big on game tape and film over than stars. Everybody has known that who has followed
right, because they don't have access to the NIL funds. The game tape from the 5 stars is better than the game tape from the 4 stars and the 3 stars. Like they're 5 stars and they pop out on that field for a reason. It's easy to see 5 stars for a reason because they're the best talents. And
most certainly, and I mean, when you look at it, Russ, too, I mean, thinking back on it, this kind of whole recruiting class, transfer portal, high school transfer portal, and then you got to recruit your own guys back. It's kind of like a lot of different aspects to put
3 slices of the pie, and you don't want to give a big slice to the guys you have no idea what they're going to bring to the table versus the in-house guys. You've already seen them for a year, or the transfer portal guys. You've already seen them in college football for at least a year.
Yeah, which makes most sense thinking about it, because, I mean, obviously Cincinnati is still trying to find their way in the NIL landscape and the football aspect of things. But on top of it, rosters are also increasing to 105 potentially. You got to put that into consideration. There's a lot of things.
That doesn't help a mid-tier power conference team like Cincinnati at all.
There's a lot of things to put into consideration when it comes to recruiting. But sometimes you want to get these guys before they get the offers. I mean, Scott Satterfield mentioned it yesterday about the offensive and the defensive line. You're not going to go out into the portal and get a 6'5", 6'6" offensive lineman or defensive end or defensive tackle without opening the checkbook. And that was the exact quotes that he says. I mean, you look down at it. I can tell you right now, Russ, Oregon's former 4-star offensive lineman that entered the portal earlier this morning, he's probably going to get $250,000, at least $350,000, maybe even more than that in the transfer portal, despite where he goes. Only being a freshman and didn't even see significant time, because you can't teach the size and the physicality that some of these guys might have. But on top of it, there's a lot of ways to allocate things in terms of NIL. If you can get some of these guys who are the lower stars and you get a chance to develop them, and then you can go out and you can hit in the transfer portal. And Russ, you and I have both talked about it. Cincinnati hit on majority of their guys in the transfer portal this offseason. If they can have another offseason where they're hitting at a 75-80% success rate in the transfer portal, it will be just fine for Cincinnati. But in terms of fans worrying about the recruiting aspect and stuff, you got to think about it. NIL is a big thing in college athletics right now. The only way to make things better, if you guys think they're not doing a good enough job, which this staff is doing a great job, because shout out Carter Wilson, Cass Simmons, the whole recruiting staff, they are identifying talent before any of these other schools ever even getting to them. Think about that.
Yeah, I don't think they had one of the 9 guys flip to a non-power conference school.
Power 5. And 3 of them go from Michigan, Florida, and LSU, I believe. So, I mean, on top of it, look where some of these guys, or Ohio State, my bad, not LSU. Look at that. All 3 of them. Ohio State had roughly $20 million in NIL for this upcoming season that we're in right now. Think about that, guys. $20 million. Cincinnati isn't funding out $20 million in NIL. Florida, above $10 million in NIL for football. On top of it, Michigan above 10 million in football. All those schools are utilizing NIL to their advantage. Cincinnati is still finding that way, but if you can go out and you can identify that talent, develop them, and then build that way, it's still a great sight to see for Cincinnati. There's still a lot of great things to come, but Cincinnati is looking in the transfer portal. And Russ, Scott Satterfield alluded to the positions they're looking at: wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line. Those are going to be the 3 positions of need. He also mentioned maybe 2 or 3 defensive backs as well. So those are going to be the positions that Cincinnati's looking at, but it's going to be interesting to see how that transpires over the next few weeks.
Yeah, just looking at the hard numbers, average team ranking of 66 nationally on all 3 major national services when you average them together. Their class ranking under Scott Satterfield on 24/7 Sports in particular has dropped multiple spots each cycle that Satterfield's overseen. Kind of broke all this down on Cincinnati Bearcats on SI. It's just the term I have for it is it is what it is. It is what it is. They're identifying the talent. They're trying to bring in the talent. You get some just brutal, specific circumstances in one sense. You get guys that want to take a bigger bag in another sense. And all you can do is identify the talent, offer the talent, try to bring the talent in, and foster that talent to be a Bearcat. I feel like they've done largely all they can do with the resources they have recruiting-wise, and I think fans would be even more upset if they had been giving way more resources to recruiting, less resources to the transfer portal. The transfer portal hits are not as heavy this season or in the upcoming cycle in the next couple of weeks when this is the most important 3-week, 4-week stretch of the entire calendar for Cincinnati football in how they want to do business nowadays and allocating your resources towards the transfer portal, which is smart. It's smart for a mid-tier power conference team that is not necessarily have as much breathing room to work with in terms of its funding. You can't miss consistently in big allocations to big recruiting classes and expect to stay alive at all, and expect to win games at all, expect to add wins at all, like they did from a 3-9 season to a 5-7 season. So all in all, still have faith in the staff. In particular, my faith in Scott Satterfield's in-game coaching and on-field decision-making is definitely teetering and wavering, given the 5-game collapse we saw at the end of the season. But as Neil mentioned, the talent evaluators know what they're doing. They've identified talent well throughout the first 2 seasons on Scott Satterfield's staff. I think that staff is well fleshed out. Zach Grant, I was impressed with him on the mic yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he made a lot of sense with what he was saying. It is what it is. The money is what it is as we stand here today, and the money is basically with how they want to use that money towards recruiting. I would think they would be pretty happy with this class despite not getting any consensus 4-star players and just 1 4-star player over the past few cycles. Those 4-star, 5-star players cost a lot of money and they're unproven. Rather give that money to a guy like Brendan Sorsby, a guy like Joe Royer to come back and be a hometown hero after he's run through some weird circumstances, but has the baseline talent to really get it done in the Big 12, stuff like that. So that wraps
it's
up.
Also too worth noting
ahead,
before we jump into this segment. Obviously, when people are looking at this recruiting class aspect, you're going to notice not many guys from Cincinnati. That's been the biggest thing talking about. But like Scott Satterfield mentioned,
they had 3 committed and they all flipped. And look at it, to programs with higher NIL. And then on top of it, Scott Satterfield even alluded that they have recruited the Cincinnati area extremely hard. And then on top of it, they're not burning any bridges by watching these guys go to the other. Cincinnati has done a great job at bringing back local kids out of the transfer portal. And I think that's not getting talked about as much as they really need to be, because you look at it, the Jawan Briggses, the Ivan Paces, the Brian Cooks. There's plenty more. Joey Kiner, Joe Royer. The list goes on and on about the local talent that decides, hey, maybe it's best for me right now to go somewhere else and then come back home later down the road. So that's something that Cincinnati is still keeping the eye on as well. So definitely had to throw that out there as well. Yeah, good point there, Neil. Getting 2 hoops after this break on Bearcat Blitz. Back at it on Bearcat Blitz. Neil Meyer, your co-host, with yours truly, Russ Heltman, here on the Believe Network. Dan Skillings hasn't been missed very much this year, Neil, but he was missed on Tuesday in a big big way. UC's offense was stifled and then some against Villanova. A season low 60 points. They shoot a season low 38% from the floor. Only guy who was really able to hunt his own shot consistently all night was Jizzle James, and even he struggled shooting the basketball from outside, just 2 of 6 from deep. Simas Lukosius, his first bad game of the year, 4 of 14 shooting, just 3 of 9 from outside. Neil, they get to the free throw line just 11 times in this game, and on the other side, the freight train known as Eric Dixon did exactly what we said he might do in our preview of this matchup. 31 points. He's now been over 25 plus in every game this season. I was saying after the football pressure yesterday, I was just chopping it up in the media room. I don't understand how this guy at 6'8", 260 is not already in the NBA. I mean, he must have been right on the edge of either. Maybe it was one of those scenarios, Neil, where Villanova's like, you could be a second round pick, or we could bring you back for this nicer NIL package than you'd make on the second round money. And that could have been the thing to sway him back to the college basketball ranks, to the ill fate of Cincinnati, because he just dominated that matchup all night long, whether it was Dylan Mitchell, switch to a smaller player, even when they doubled him 4 or 5 times. I mean, fans were calling for them to double Eric Dixon. They tried it 4 or 5 times.
They tried it. He still made shots.
Right. They still averaged over 1.2, 1.3 points per possession on those scenarios. So didn't seem like there was a whole lot of answers, Neil, for Eric Dixon. And then on the flip side, I was a little disappointed in what I saw from Wes Miller and his rotations in this game. Just in a scenario like that, nip-tuck battle on the road at Villanova, it just felt like a time to shorten the rotation to 7-8 guys. 10 guys, 10-man rotation. They kept it rolling in this one. Overall, Cincinnati played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players in this game. Probably could have cut out Tyler Betsy and Aronson Page in this one. Connor Hickman maybe could have had his minutes cut in this game. They were not giving them a whole lot of action, Neil. And once they took out the starters for portions of that second half, the offense went completely dead. And that's when the runs that Cincinnati would make ultimately got stifled, and they were never able to retake the lead after going up 2-0.
Yeah, Russ, it's a good point you mentioned that too, like the rotation aspect. I think the biggest thing in this game was Cincinnati was simply caught off guard because there was, Russ, let's look at the first 8 minutes exactly. There was no under 16 media timeout. The first media stoppage
played through it.
Came at 12 minutes where Wes had to call a timeout. So on top of it, I think the change of pace definitely kind of threw the rotations off a little bit for Wes, especially with how the game was kind of being officiated. Cincinnati didn't have a free throw in the first half. Villanova had quite a few, so that could have maybe played a factor into it. But overall, I think that definitely kind of messed with the rotation aspect of things because this was a Villanova team who loved to slow it down, and then at times they would like to push it, slow it down. But Villanova just simply controlled the game from the jump, and they had their opportunities there within the first half, Russ. But I think I'll say what the biggest momentum shift in the first half of this one, where Cincinnati could have maybe rallied back and hit that momentum and kind of shifted the gears a little bit, was the missed 3 from Simas Lukosius in the corner when it was 18-14. If he hits that 3, it cuts the lead to 1. Instead, Villanova goes down, hits a triple, extends the lead to 7. I think that was the biggest thing. And then you give up the 3 right before halftime. And to be honest with you, Day Thomas played tremendous defense on that shot. That was just a player making a play right there. And that was a heck of a shot. It falls in. But in the end, they simply had no answer for Eric Dixon. And thinking about it too, Russ, we were talking about it, his ability to shoot the 3 ball and really kind of play a role in that aspect of this game. He was 1 for 4 to start from 3. Late in the second half, Cincinnati makes that run, cuts it to 5? And then what happens, Russ? Eric Dixon comes back and hits 2 dagger 3s. And right from there, it was kind of like, okay, well, if you send a double team or you don't want to go out and guard him, you're going to let him shoot that. He makes 2 contested 3s. And from there it's over. It was over from there. They tried to make a late push, but it just desperately kind of seemed like down the final stretch, Russ, that they were playing more individually than more team-oriented in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Wes Miller after the game, a little bit of a striking comment saying that he hasn't felt the same kind of intensity from his team, the same kind of fire over the past week, kind of dating back to before the Alabama
State game.
which only resulted in an 18-point win that Wes Miller obviously famously apologized to fans that they had to pay for. I just don't get it, man. I get it to a sense, but I don't get it to where, like, Wes isn't leaving them off the hook at practice. Like, he's not.
No, absolutely not.
We've seen practices.
We've seen it.
Full practices. Like, Wes is not a guy that is going to bring a laissez-faire attitude to any practice. So it may be, Neil, just 18 to 22-year-old guys. It's not necessarily easy to keep them 100% motivated all the time. It blows my mind, but with players like, for example, Zion Williamson in the NBA, like, he can't keep weight off. He can't keep weight off. He can't figure out a way to not be fat. But he's a $100 million all-NBA caliber player if he were to do that. And it's like, it's these things right there for you. If you just make the right kind of hard decisions. It's not necessarily anybody. Nobody's getting fat on the Bearcats roster. I'm not saying anything like that, but it's just, it does make your head scratch a little bit to where it's like, this group could be so special, Neil, and they need to be coming together, and they need to realize that they've done nothing yet. They've played the 300 plus ranked schedule, strength of schedule wise on KenPom going into this game. And then you put up a stinker offensively, and a stinker, Neil, that Wes Miller kind of called out in the first 10, 15 minutes of the game. The offensive intensity, the ball screen defense too, just every little kind of energy portion of the game wasn't necessarily up to par for Cincinnati in those first 10 to 15 minutes. And you can see it in the score line. They outscore Villanova in the second half 32-31, but they lose that first half 37-28.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference maker too, Russ. Obviously, you mentioned this kind of game. I mean, we've seen it in practice, the kind of attitude, the toughness that Wes Miller instills in this team.
He's not letting them off scot-free or making them think they've arrived or anything.
I mean,
I don't think.
I mean, we saw it the week before. What was that? After the Morehead State and the NKU game. I mean, guys, we'll be the first to tell you Wes Miller broke 2 clipboards in that practice and broke 2 clipboards. Like, we see what kind of
that was when they had the best point differential in the country.
Yeah, we see that. We see the standards that are set for this program. But on top of it, I can't really say it was a testament to the first true road environment either, because, I mean, you go on the road to play Georgia Tech and there was nobody in the stands outside of that. So maybe you kind of consider that to a factor, but you really can't, because it's one of those hostile environments. Everybody knows what you get when you go play a Big East team. Everybody knows that. But on top of it, I think, Russ, if you're asking me, I think they needed that loss, to be honest with you. Especially now you have a couple of days to get ready for Howard, and then you have a whole week to get things right heading into Xavier. Then you have another whole week to get things right heading into another a tough Dayton team, which, Russ, let's be honest, there could be a great opportunity at hand for Cincinnati where you get a top 25 Xavier team and you get a top 25 Dayton team in the next 2 weeks.
Very possible. Dayton sitting at 33rd on KenPom right now with a 7-2 record. Xavier hovering around that same area. Xavier at 65th on KenPom, while the next opponent, Howard, a game that just lost a lot of juice coming off of that Villanova game. It has even less importance in my eyes. Just from a fan perspective, it's very important for the team to get back on track, get back to shooting well, get back in the friendly confines of Fifth Third Arena, and blow out a team that they're expected to win 98.9% of the time against on ESPN's matchup predictor. 3-5 Howard team, 273rd overall. Neil, I think the biggest question mark for this Howard game is, will we see Dan Skillings at all in this one? I'm skeptical. I'm leaning more, if we're doing the 50% range, I'm leaning more towards about a 75, 80% chance. I think that he does not get out there against Howard, and they try to ramp him up for the game against Xavier. Even then, though, Neil, we may not see Dan Skillings at all over the next 10 days. We know how cautious they can be with these injuries.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And I mean, obviously everybody knows he's gotten cleared to do some kind of stuff on the floor. He's been shooting. We saw the workout videos before the game at Villanova.
Yeah, making progress for sure.
He's making progress for sure, but obviously heading into Howard, that's going to be something. Now, if we see him on Howard, I don't expect him to play much, but I'm still trending there.
Similar. What did Day play? Like 8 to 10 minutes that first game? Yeah.
But if it's me, Russ, especially with how Wes Miller has been open about how cautious they want to be with injuries, because I mean, you got to think about it. Looking at the Villanova game, CJ Frederick was battling that little rolled ankle. He didn't even play at Villanova, even though he's healthy. He still kind of dealing with something in his ankle. Connor Hickman rolled an ankle. Dylan Mitchell rolled an ankle early on. Then you have the injury to Dan right now. Day coming off the injury. Wes has been very open and adamant that they're going to be extremely cautious with this guy, with their guys and this team. Now, on top of it, even if Dan gets cleared for a full 5-on-5, obviously we won't see practice this week. We have a media availability later this afternoon, but no open practice this week heading into Howard, so we won't know for sure what he is going through. But on top of it, Russ, I think that Howard was the target for him to come back, but I don't see him playing Sunday. I think they go overly cautious. I think they give him an extra week to rest and get ready heading into Xavier.
That Xavier game, man. Xavier week, it's approaching. And Neil, you could argue this is the most important game of Wes Miller's tenure so far. Like, this is a pure, straight up, you gotta beat your rival to prove that the 6-0 record was anything at all. Because with back-to-back losses against the first two top 100 KenPom teams you place on your schedule and teams outside the top 60 in KenPom at that, it would not be very good. 60 as of this recording. So big week approaching for the Bearcats. I know Wes Miller and all them know it's a big week as well. Got to get this streak broken against Xavier and prove to the nation that you are worthy of all the hype and the top 15 ranking entering the Villanova matchup. Preview that next week right here on Bearcat Blitz. Been a fun show with Neil Meyer. I'm Russ Eltman. Hope you all have a lovely weekend, everybody. Enjoy the Howard action.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three. Yes!